The signal from the void. The stars had always been silent. For Ambassador Zelthar of the Valkorian Diplomatic Corps, this silence was a comfort. In his 47 cycles of service, he had learned that when the universe stayed quiet, civilization stayed safe. The Galactic Assembly had maintained peace for nearly 800 standard years through one simple principle: isolation of dangerous species. And no species was more dangerous than the humans of Earth. Zelthar remembered the day the Assembly had voted to quarantine humanity. He had been a junior clerk then, barely old enough to understand the gravity of the decision. The debate had lasted for weeks. Some delegates argued for complete elimination. Others suggested strict observation. In the end, they had chosen containment. The humans could keep their solar system, their 9 planets, and their small collection of moons. But they could never leave. They could never spread their chaos across the peaceful galaxy. The decision seemed wise at the time. Earth was a nightmare world where everything evolved to kill. The oceans contained predators larger than starships. The land swarmed with creatures that had mastered cooperative hunting. Even the microscopic life was aggressive and adaptable. The humans themselves were the worst of all. They had conquered every environment on their planet through sheer stubborn refusal to die. They had survived ice ages, supervolcano eruptions, asteroid impacts, and countless wars against each other. They were relentless survivors in a galaxy that valued peaceful coexistence. For 287 years, the quarantine had worked perfectly. The humans had agreed to the terms without much protest. They had signed the treaties, accepted the restrictions, and retreated to their home system. The galaxy breathed easier. Trade flourished. Art and culture bloomed. The universe was safe from the Deathworlders. Then everything changed on a cold morning in the Assembly's communication center. Zelthar was reviewing routine reports when his console began flashing urgent red alerts. A signal had been detected from the Void Sector, a region of space that had been marked as forbidden territory for over a millennium. The Void was controlled by the Collective, an empire so ancient and so terrible that even mentioning their name in public could cause panic. The Collective did not conquer worlds in the traditional sense. They harvested them. They would arrive in a system, identify the most biologically useful species, and take everything. Not just the adults, but the children, the elders, everyone. They transported entire populations to massive processing stations hidden deep in the void. There, they kept their captives alive in suspended animation chambers, slowly extracting valuable chemical compounds from their living bodies. The process could take centuries. No one ever escaped. No one ever sent messages out. Until today. The signal was ancient and corrupted, barely readable through the interference of deep space. The Assembly's best linguists could not identify the language. The format was obsolete, using transmission protocols that had not been common in hundreds of years. Most officials wanted to classify it as background noise and move on. But something about the signal bothered Zelthar. It had a pattern, a rhythm that suggested intelligent design. Someone had sent this message on purpose. Someone had been trying to reach out for a very long time. He authorized a deeper analysis, assigning the signal to the Assembly's most advanced translation computers. The machines worked for 3 days straight, comparing the signal against every known language database. They found nothing. The language did not match any current civilization. It did not match any historical records. It was as if the signal had come from a species that had never existed in the first place. The mystery might have ended there, except for a coincidence that would change the fate of the galaxy. At the same moment the Assembly was struggling with the signal, a human listening station on the edge of their quarantine zone picked up the same transmission. The station was called Outpost Horizon, a small facility on a frozen moon orbiting the furthest planet in their system. Only 12 people staffed the outpost, and their job was mind-numbingly boring. They listened to the cosmic background radiation, tracked asteroids, and maintained the equipment. Nothing exciting ever happened. Sergeant David Park was monitoring the long-range sensors when his equipment detected the signal. He was 34 years old, born on Europa, one of Jupiter's moons. He had joined the military because it was one of the few ways to see different parts of the solar system. The quarantine meant humans could not explore the galaxy, but they could at least explore their own neighborhood. David had spent the last 2 years on Outpost Horizon, and he was desperately bored. The signal changed that instantly. His training kicked in immediately. He isolated the transmission, ran it through the standard analysis protocols, and waited for the computer to translate it. The computer returned an error message. Language unknown. David frowned and tried again with different parameters. Still nothing. He was about to report it as an anomaly when something caught his attention. There was a word in the signal that his computer had flagged as potentially familiar. The word was Earth. David's heart began to race. He pulled up the raw audio of the signal and listened carefully. The language was strange, using tones and inflections he did not recognize. But underneath the unfamiliar sounds, there were words he could almost understand. He ran the signal through the historical language archives, going back centuries through humanity's linguistic evolution. Finally, he found a match. The signal was in Mandarin Chinese, but not modern Mandarin. This was ancient Mandarin, the kind spoken on Earth nearly 300 years ago, before the quarantine. With shaking hands, David began the translation process. It took him 6 hours, cross-referencing old dictionaries and language guides that most people had forgotten existed. Word by word, the message revealed itself. And with each word, the horror grew deeper. We are the colonists of the vessel Golden Horizon. We left Earth 289 years ago seeking a new home beyond the stars. We were captured by machines we did not understand. They took us to a dark place. They separated us into chambers. They keep us alive but we cannot move. We cannot speak to each other. They drain something from our bodies. It burns but never stops. Our children were born here in the darkness. They have never felt sunlight. They have never breathed free air. We are dying slowly, one generation at a time. Please, if anyone can hear this, we are still human. We are still alive. Please remember us. Please send help. David sat in his chair, staring at the translation on his screen. His mind struggled to process what he was reading. The Golden Horizon had been one of the last colony ships to leave Earth before the quarantine. It had carried 15,000 people, all volunteers seeking new worlds to settle. The ship had vanished shortly after leaving the solar system. Everyone assumed it had been destroyed by some mechanical failure or natural disaster. The families had mourned. The names had been added to memorials. Life had moved on. But the ship had not been destroyed. It had been captured. For nearly 3 centuries, 15,000 humans and all their descendants had been held prisoner by the collective. They had been tortured, harvested, kept alive in agony for generations. And no one had known. No one had come to save them. David sent his report through every available channel. He marked it as maximum priority and flagged it for immediate attention by the highest authorities. Within 2 hours, every military commander in the Sol system had read the translation. Within 4 hours, the civilian government was holding emergency sessions. Within 6 hours, humanity's secret military council had convened for only the 3rd time in history. The council met in a hidden facility deep beneath the surface of Mars. The location was classified. Most humans did not even know the council existed. These were the men and women who had spent centuries preparing for the day when humanity might need to break free from their cage. They had built weapons in secret. They had trained soldiers in hidden bases scattered throughout the asteroid belt. They had constructed warships in the crushing atmospheres of gas giants where no sensor could detect them. They had done all of this knowing the galaxy would call them criminals if they were ever discovered. They had done it anyway because humans do not abandon their own Fleet Admiral Sarah Chen was the oldest member of the council at 71 years. She had dedicated her entire life to preparing for this moment. Her great-great-grandmother had been one of the people who signed the quarantine agreement, and the shame of that surrender had echoed through her family for generations. Sarah had sworn she would never sign such an agreement. She had sworn that humanity would be free. Today, that oath would be tested. She stood at the head of the conference table and looked at each council member in turn. These were generals, scientists, engineers, and intelligence officers. They were the best humanity had to offer, and they all knew what was coming. "We have confirmation," she said quietly. "The signal is genuine. The Golden Horizon survivors are being held in Void Sector 7 by the Collective. They have been there for 287 years. How many are still alive?" someone asked. "Our best estimate based on population growth models and the capacity of collective holding facilities," Sarah paused, "between 200,000 and 300,000 people." The room fell silent. What had started as 15,000 colonists had become hundreds of thousands of descendants, all born into captivity, all suffering in the darkness. "How long until we can mobilize?" Sarah asked her military commanders. "The first expeditionary fleet can launch in 18 hours, Admiral James Rodriguez replied. He was a younger man, only 45, but he had earned his position through brilliance and dedication. "We have 287 warships ready for immediate deployment. Another 400 can be mobilized within a week." "What about the assembly?" a council member asked. "They will try to stop us. They will say we are violating the quarantine." Sarah smiled grimly. "Let them try. We have been preparing for this confrontation for 3 centuries. If the assembly wants to prevent us from rescuing our people, they will learn why Earth is called a death world." The vote was unanimous. Every council member agreed. Humanity would launch its first military expedition beyond the solar system. They would cross into forbidden space. They would violate every treaty they had ever signed. And they would bring their people home, no matter the cost. The preparation began immediately. Across the solar system, hidden military bases came to life. Warships that had been concealed inside asteroids emerged from their hiding places. Soldiers who had trained their entire lives for a war that might never come received their deployment orders. Weapons that had been built in secret were loaded onto transports. Humanity was going to war. Admiral Chen stood on the bridge of the UHS Indomitable, the flagship of the first expeditionary fleet. Through the viewing window, she could see the rest of her armada gathering. The ships were not elegant or beautiful. They were brutal machines of war, covered in thick armor and bristling with weapons. They had been designed by people who understood that in space combat, there was no room for artistic expression. There was only survival and victory.